respond to those problems and handle them in a way that will increase their quality. I keep using the example partly because it is such a simple and kind of boneheaded example, but I've worked with a lot of people in therapy over the years where a big part of their enjoyment of life, all their lives, depended on reading, and giving them the homework assignment of checking out big print books from the library was a major improvement in their quality of life. I still find it sort of bizarre that that's true and that it continues to be true. But yeah, so the converse would be like giving a more positive message about aging. So like telling people that like nothing much changes in your vision as you get older, and you're telling that to somebody who can no longer read. That's not going to help the quality of life either. So you have that kind of realistic approach. The other thing, and this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine. I'll try not to write it too much, but I think quality of life has a lot of different meanings, and I think it tends to be one of those general constructs that's way too broad, and that being much more specific about whatever it is that we actually have in mind when we say quality of life. Because I think it means everything. We try to, on one level, we try to lump like everything in the world into it, and therefore, in some ways, it doesn't mean anything. As you talk to specific people, every individual has something. Usually, has something more precise in mind.
I think even if it is, well, it seems very negative, but just understanding what's going to happen. I mean, if you look around the room, how many people have glasses on, right? Quite a few people, some sort of corrective, something with your eyes. You know, for us that have to wear glasses or contacts, we know that there's a serious difference between wearing them and not wearing them. For example, I'm almost legally blind. My eyes are worse than my 79-year-old grandparents.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, you gave the example of trying to recognize what type of screw it was. I have no idea. I can possibly see that a screw is there, and I can touch it and try to figure it out, but without glasses, I'm just completely lost. And I know that it's going to get worse, but I know that I'm here and it can be better, and there is a corrective means for it, and it's never going to be perfect. But I think because we're already dealing with adaptations even at the younger ages, that it's going to make aging a little bit easier because we know that it's going to get bad, but we already know that there's a better and a worse kind of thing. Correct it to an extent.
And I think making that connection and making it about each ability is an important part of understanding what's going on, too. Sometimes we talk about this stuff as though it's all specific to aging. All of the impairments have some analog with younger people as well. Yeah.
I was just wondering, you hear people with who are maybe blind, they develop other senses to a greater extent. Is there some compensation with the other senses that goes on where?
I think there can be, but I think it's part of this kind of the way that people sort of buy into the stereotypes of aging and the idea that, well, I'm never going to be young again. I think most people don't spontaneously work at that in the same way. So, could you use your hearing or other senses to compensate some? You probably could. Yeah. We don't routinely teach old people Braille or sign language or encourage old people to get seeing eye dogs. I mean, there's tons of things that we typically don't do with an older person with a disability that we would do with the younger person with a disability. Nor do they spontaneously sort of work at those things. Kind of figuring out stuff yourself. You're on a level of just making your house easier to get around in if you can't see. Really obvious. You would think obvious kind of stuff. But I do think some of it is just people get so locked into this is due to aging, you can't do anything about aging, therefore you can't do anything about this. You can always do something.
Is there a correlation between claustrophobia and glaucoma in later age?
Claustrophobia?
Because the tunnel vision, I would think it would make you feel more claustrophobic.
Oh, in that sense. I thought you meant the people with claustrophobia.
No.
Watch television. It's an interesting question. I don't know that I've ever seen anything on that. But I've seen studied the most about connections between sensory impairment and any kind of psychopathology has been more around like people getting depressed or anxious in response to vision and hearing changes. And also kind of an interesting literature on paranoia-like suspiciousness with vision and hearing changes. And actually, I had a student do a paper in class, and he was going, the clinical literature early on suggested like people with hearing loss would be more suspicious because you'd have that thing of you're not hearing what people say and you start laughing, so you think they're laughing at you. But at least at that time, the lit review suggested it was actually vision loss was more tied to suspiciousness. It's an interesting idea. Somebody ought to take a look at that. I mean, you would think that just having your vision reduced that way might give you kind of a chronic feeling of being closed in. Actually, just thinking about it, I'm getting a little anxious. A little bit of a tendency towards claustrophobia. Other comments? Yeah.
Yeah, the problem, sometimes I notice age-related vision problems. I know of people who don't have a problem driving. They might be frustrated that they can't drive as fast or they have to be more careful. But the most frustrating thing is how other people react to them. Honking and calling them names when they're driving too slow or trying to find an address and driving slowly and someone drives by you and yells at you. That's how we react to other people's changes.
Although I wouldn't totally discount whatever the older driver is doing that provokes the honking. But you get some of both. And there is an interesting issue about the way that we set all kinds of devices and traffic patterns and so forth to favor younger people. You know, one of the things I've heard for years is how many controls on things are very small, both physically and visually, and that interferes with visual impairment. Or on the speed thing, they certainly, pedestrian crosswalks are mostly timed to somebody who's young and in pretty good shape, but it takes you a little longer to get across the street. And that's a social policy decision. I mean, you could actually time the crosswalk to an older person. We could have a more society-wide expectation that slow-moving older drivers is okay. Not everybody should have to keep up with it.
Just people that have patience, after honking your horn at somebody, you just realize this person has vision problems. It's more difficult for them. Give them a break.
You should also worry a little bit about the fact that somebody with vision problems is trans. I mean, I kind of agree on both sides. But I mean, I was actually amazed that a few years ago when we had the guy that Christ for the Santa Monica Farmers Market, and how positive most of the popular reaction in the media coverage actually was. I thought it was actually a pretty good example of what we probably ought to have more screening for their safety as well as for other people. As it gets to...
Yeah, you killed 23 people, right? You killed.
And an awful lot of the media coverage is, it's okay, he's 83.
No, it's not okay.
I think it's one of the things I want to go on local television as a gerontologist and say, string him up, but...
Well, it's different than, like, if it were a college-age kid, they probably would have been, like, drunk or something when they did it, which would have made a little more controversy.
Yeah, but this guy killed 23 people. You know?
Well,
So what? He shouldn't be
I
driving.
know. I understand.
Doesn't matter.
And there really wasn't, at least in the press, I mean, what happened in the courts, there wasn't a lot of exploration of why it happened.
No, there wasn't. I
I
didn't see
mean,
anything.
the fact that he's 83 is not an explanation for any of the things that he did. And he had a prior history.